Welcome, everybody. I want to be respectful of everybody's time so that we can get started on time and get you all home at a reasonable hour. This is the scoping meeting for the Sherwin-Williams Mixed-Use Project Environmental Impact Report. My name is Charlie Bryant. I'm the Community Development Director for the City of Emeryville. Just quickly to introduce the folks that we have up here. This is Meera Desai, Senior Planner for the City of Emeryville. She is the case planner for the city on the project. And then our environmental consultants, Judy Malamut and Amy Paulson. And they are with LSA Associates. These are the consultants who have been hired by the city to write the environmental impact report for the project. I want to emphasize tonight, first of all, as you can tell, this is not a planning commission nor a city council meeting, but of course it is a public meeting, and it is being televised live on ETV, and it's also being videotaped. So you or anybody can go back and watch the video of it later if you want to. And folks who aren't here can be watching it at home on ETV. The purpose of the meeting tonight is to hear your comments on what topics you believe should be covered in the Sherwin-Williams EIR and what alternatives should be considered, what alternatives to the project should be considered in the EIR. And Amy will go over that in more detail in a minute. She has a short presentation. After Amy's presentation, we will take your comments. As I said, some of you may not have heard this, we have two kinds of cards over here. We have speaker cards, which are the little ones, and we have comment cards, which are the big ones. If you want to speak, you can fill out the little one and put it up here on the front table. If you want to submit a written comment, but not necessarily speak, you can fill out the comment card and give that to us. You can also do both. You can also submit written comments by sending it to Miru. The address isn't up there anymore, but it's 1333 Park Avenue, Emeryville, California, 94608, which is this building. And we will take written comments until this Friday, January 30th at 5 p.m. This is a little less formal than a city council or planning commission meeting, a little more formal than your standard community workshop, however. We are not going to time you. So I know you're all used to having 3 minutes at the council or planning commission. We're not going to time you. We would ask you all to be respectful of each other's time, so please don't filibuster. If you have something to say, please be as succinct as you can so that everybody has a chance to talk. But we're not going to cut you off unless you start going on and repeating yourself. We'd also like to note that we have received a number of comment letters already, I think about 6 or so, including one from 1500 Park. If you have something to say that you know is already in a letter that has been submitted to us, you really don't have to say it again here. If you want to, you can. But again, to be respectful of everybody's time, if we already have the comment in writing, you don't really need to say it verbally again. But you can if you want to. I think that's it. Have I left anything out? From who? Rule. Oh, a comment letter from Rule. And we have a comment letter from a number of public agencies, I think East Bay Mud and some others, what so-called responsible agencies. That's the CEQA term. City of Emeryville is the lead agency. Anybody else, any other public agency is called a responsible agency. I'm not making a judgment on them. That's just what they're called. All right, before we get started, any questions about what we're doing here tonight or how it's going to go? All right, with that, I will turn it over to Amy.
Great. Thank you, everybody, for coming. It's always great to see a lot of folks out to provide comments. As Charlie said, we're here for the scoping meeting for the Sherwin-Williams project. Yes?
Excuse me, can that screen be pushed back a little bit so the people on the right side can see?
We struggled with this. The problem is the image gets all skewed if we do that.
Just make sure it doesn't.
You may not have heard at the beginning, but our Unfortunately, our whole AV system in this council chambers has kind of died, so the projector doesn't work and the overhead camera doesn't work. So we're using makeshift setup right now.
Okay, that's. So I'm going to try to keep my presentation short because the reason we're here tonight is to hear from you about concerns that you have. This slide goes over what I will be covering. I'm going to briefly describe the proposed project, the purpose of the scoping session tonight. I'll describe the California Environmental Quality Act, or CEQA. I'll walk us through the environmental review process. I'll discuss the proposed scope of the EIR, and then we'll go to public comments. So here are two conceptual plans showing the proposed project. The project applicant includes a variety of uses within the proposed project. There'll be residential uses, commercial uses, park space, open space, internal roadways. The EIR will actually evaluate two options to the project, option A and option B. So there will be discussion of potential impacts associated with both options within the environmental document. And here's a development summary of the project. The level of development for both options is similar. There'll be creation of new parcels, 540 dwelling units, 64,000 square feet of commercial space, 16 street parking spaces, different garage parking spaces. There'll be a 1.4 acre park space, and the difference between option A and option B will be the location of the park and parcel C1 and C2. Let me just go back. So the major visual difference between the two options is the location of these two parcels in the park, and that's different in option B. So the purpose here tonight is to receive comments from the public about environmental topics and alternatives that should be evaluated in the EIR. We are at the very start of the environmental review process. We haven't done any analysis yet. So we're really here tonight to hear what you have to say. If you have concerns, we would definitely want to hear them. And again, we're fine with verbal comments or written comments. Either works for us. So we are here tonight as part of the CEQA process, or the California Environmental Quality Act. CEQA requires that lead agencies, which in this case is the city, identify and disclose significant environmental effects of a project under their jurisdiction and either avoid these effects or mitigate them. CEQA documents are disclosure documents. The city is disclosing to the public, if we approve this project and it is built, these are the type of environmental impacts that would be associated with the project. There are a variety of types of CEQA documents. For this project, the city has determined that an EIR or an environmental impact report would be the most appropriate document, and it will be a very thorough and detailed document. It's the CEQA document that is generally the longest and involves the most analysis. To give you a sense of who is involved in the preparation of the EIR, I've included this slide. We have assembled a very large team for the analysis, so there'll be planners, traffic engineers, air quality and global climate change analysts, noise analysts, cultural resource analysts, geologists, hydrologists, hazardous materials analysts, as well as visual simulation technicians who will be creating visual simulations and shadow diagrams of both option A and option B. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the evaluation process that will be included, that we go through when preparing the EIR. The first step is to identify the baseline or the existing environmental conditions. We're currently in this phase right now. We're gathering information about the site, area surrounding the site, Emeryville, and the region. The next step is to identify significance thresholds for each topic. And this threshold helps determine whether an impact is considered significant or less than significant. We then undertake the environmental analysis, and this takes several months, and there'll be traffic modeling and noise modeling, and this is a big chunk of time it goes into undertaking the environmental analysis. And then the impact analysis looks at the change between the existing conditions and the conditions that would occur either during or after project implementation, and looks at how that difference relates to the significance thresholds. So keep in mind, for CEQA purposes, impacts are direct physical changes to the environment. CEQA documents don't look at economic or social changes. So I've included the slide to sort of show visually how the analysis occurs. I just want to say this is a conceptual example. We haven't started any of the analysis. I've just included this so it's sort of easier to walk you through what we do with the analysis. So for this example, we're using air pollution as a conceptual example. So we have here the current air pollution levels, or that exist in the environment. And then we undertake our analysis and we find out what the project-generated air pollution would be, and that's in the gray, or the impact, the air pollution impact. So we've identified significance thresholds. And for something like air pollution, the air district says if you emit over so many pounds per day, that's a significant impact. So we see our threshold right there. Now, if our impact fell under this line, it would be considered a less than significant environmental impact. If it goes beyond the threshold, then it's considered a significant impact, and we need to either identify mitigation measures to reduce that impact, or if there are no available mitigation measures, then that's considered a significant and unavoidable environmental impact. Again, conceptual example, no analysis has occurred. The EIR will also include an alternatives chapter. An EIR must include a reasonable range of alternatives to the project, or the location of the project and the alternatives must feasibly attain most of the objectives of the project and avoid or lessen any significant effects. The EIR also includes a no project alternative. And additionally, the EIR doesn't need to consider every feasible potential alternative, just a reasonable range of alternatives. So this is the procedural steps that we will go through. I'm going to try to get through this quickly. Where you see a diamond, that is an opportunity for public input. Public input is a very important component of the CEQA process. So the first two squares have already occurred. The applicant has proposed a project for the site, and the city, as lead agency, has determined that an EIR is necessary. We're currently in the scoping of environmental issues, which is why we're here tonight, to hear potential concerns that you may have or issues you would like to see evaluated in the EIR. At the end of the scoping period, which ends this Friday, we take all the comments, all verbal comments and written comments, and we begin our analysis, and we crank through that for a couple months. And then we prepare a public review draft EIR. The draft EIR is circulated for 45 days, open for public review. You can, again, review it. It will be on the city's website and provide public comments. During that 45-day comment period, we'll come back. There'll be a public hearing on the draft EIR, and we will provide a summary of our findings. At the end of the public hearing period, we'll take all the comments that have been received and prepare a response to comment document. In that document, we'll respond to every environmental concern that people have raised. The response to comment document plus the draft EIR is considered the final EIR that will then be released for public review, and then the document and the project will be considered by the Planning Commission and City Council.
Question?
Yes.
How did the city determine that an environmental impact report was necessary for this project?
I'd say it was a judgment call. We had initially thought that an initial study mitigated negative declaration would be adequate, but after hearing concerns raised by the community and the city council, it seemed like the comfort level would be a lot higher if an environmental impact report were prepared. It's up to the city to determine which to do.
It's always the case. It's up to the city manager or whatever?
Yeah.
Okay.
Question. Quick question.
Okay.
Amy, who do you work for, and who is preparing the environmental impact?
LSA Associates. LSA Associates is an environmental consulting firm, and we are working for the city.
Right, but what city are you in?
Oh, we're located in Berkeley.
Berkeley?
Yeah.
And what does LSA stand for?
LSA Associates has been around for 40 years, and it stands for Larry Seaman Associates, who was the original founder of the company, but no longer works for the company, so it's just LSA now. But we have nine offices statewide, and Judy and I have worked throughout the Bay Area, Emeryville, Oakland, Berkeley, Albany, El Cerrito. So
You write all of our EIRs in Emeryville, correct?
no, we would like to, but
Most of them? No?
I think we're kind of veering. We're almost done here. So let me just finish. So these are all the topics that will be included in the EIR. Every topic you see here will have its own individual chapter of analysis. It's probably easier for me to talk about what won't be included in the EIR. We're not going to talk about agricultural resources. We won't talk about mineral resources. We'll have a discussion about biological resources, but it won't be a standalone chapter. And then we also don't talk about timber resources, just because they don't seem applicable to the site. And again, we'll have, I wanted to point out the visual resources analysis will have visual simulations as well as shadow diagrams for both options. And the alternatives will have a discussion of various alternatives to the proposed project. And that is my last slide. So the next steps is for us to hear from you. And I would encourage you, if you have comments, if you have concerns, if there are things that you want to see evaluated in the EIR, please let us know. If you don't want to speak publicly, please provide a comment card or please send a letter. Letters can be submitted to the city until this Friday at 5 o'clock, and you can send them to Maru.
And the business cards are here if anybody wants.
Thank you, Amy. I'm not sure if I said this at the outset, but if I did, I'll just say it again. The purpose of tonight's meeting is to talk about the EIR and what should be in the EIR, all the things that Amy just talked about. It's not to talk about the project itself, not to talk about whether you like the project or don't like the project. If there's an alternative to the project that you want considered in the EIR, then that's absolutely appropriate. If you have questions or comments or criticisms about the city and the way we've conducted things or whatever, in the interest of being respectful of everybody's time here, I would respectfully request that you direct those comments to us after the meeting or at some other time. Again, I don't know if everybody heard this, we are not timing you tonight. So you can take as long as you want, but just be aware that you'll face the wrath of your neighbors if you take too long. And so I have, I think, about 10 speaker cards here, and I'll just read these names off, and we're going to just do this with a roaming microphone over there. If you haven't submitted a speaker card and you want to, you can just fill it, they're over there. You can fill it out and bring it up here. And then when we've gotten through the speaker cards, we'll ask if anybody else wants to speak who didn't submit a speaker card. All right, so with that, as I said, we're going to have a roaming microphone, and Miru's going to walk it around. So the first speaker is Richard Ambro.
Hi, I'm Rich Ambro. I'm a retired PhD archaeologist and historian, and I'm a longtime resident of Emeryville, a longtime student of the past in Emeryville, and I'm very glad to see that LSA has been brought on to prepare the EIR. You have a good reputation, certainly for cultural resource studies, and I'm hoping that you come through again, do a good job for the EIR for cultural resources this time as well. I'm most interested in the potential impact to buried cultural resources, archaeological resources, historical and prehistoric, that result from any configuration of the project. So I'm not really opposed or in favor of any of the options, but I am concerned that the project, however configured, will impact in some way and destroy in some way buried cultural resources. So, you know, I don't know what the preference of LSA is as far as pre-construction testing or whatever. It's not obligated by CEQA, but I have a preference for it myself professionally, and I have worked on many projects where we did it and to beneficial results. But again, it's an option that you need to consider, but not necessarily embrace. But I would really urge you to consider then the use of professional archaeological monitoring in all disturbance of undisturbed soil, excavation, pre-drilling, pile driving, and so on for the identification of buried resources. And yeah, so given that, discovery, is not good. It's, relying on the excavators and so the diggers, the machinery to stop and tell somebody that they have found the human remains or an archaeological site or whatever. It doesn't work. It just doesn't work. Scheduling, pressure, and so on. But obviously, we don't know where everything is, and even pre-construction testing won't necessarily identify oddball finds, so that you do have to have monitoring to identify these things when they're encountered for the first time. So anyway, briefly, part of the project is bordered by Temescal Creek, which is a long time focus of interest and occupation, both in the prehistoric period and the historic period. It's a permanent stream, and there were identified along the length, even beyond the project area, a number of prehistoric sites, about 1900 by Nelson. Now, two of them were destroyed. They were found at the mouth of the creek, and Emeryville Shell Mound and its twin, and they each have a trinomial, but they're gone. But the others were recorded, but we know nothing about them. We don't know about the date, what they did there, why they were there, and so on. Nor do we know anything about buried sites to the north and south of the creek. The creek flooded repeatedly in historic times, certainly, and part of it might have been due to the overgrazing in the Mission period and the later historic period, but who knows how old the flooding pattern was, so that there may be smaller sites away that have never recorded that might still be there and offer some interest, some evidence of prehistoric activities. Okay, so also keep in mind that deep sites, very, very deep sites, are possible as well. Before about 5,000 years ago, the sea level was lower, and the configuration of the streams and so on was a little different. And you could have sites like in San Francisco. They've recently found 2 human remains deeply buried underwater, under the water table, that you wouldn't expect. It was unexpected, but they were found through archaeological monitoring. So that could also be true for prehistoric sites. I'm also interested, and I think everyone is who's an archaeologist, in the possibility of evidence of early historic contact at the sites that are found. None was ever identified at the Emeryville Shell Mound, but there's always a haunting suspicion that there might be some evidence, and maybe one of the other loci along the creek, or somewhere in the refuse of the disturbed Emeryville Shell Mound. We just don't know. That would consist of glass beads, shell beads that were drilled with steel tools and so on. Very subtle things. And also, the Mission Dolores owned Emeryville for a brief period. And it was founded in 18 No, 1776, and sometime before they left, sometime before 1820. But they had cowboys here, they had butchering, we just don't know what they did. And so any evidence of that period would be very, very interesting. And then there's the Rancho period. After 1820, the land belonged to the Peralta family, and they owned it from 1820 into the gold rush, and then a little bit later after that. And they had large corrals. They raised cattle, and they had large corrals that straddled the creek. And if you look at von Schmidt's map, 1852 von Schmidt's map, it was a map that must have, judging from the title, must have had to do with his claiming the land. So it was as is, as opposed to what they wanted to do. So that's very important. There were corrals. There could be Matanza deposits. I'm almost done. And also, the gold rush. The gold rush in Emeryville is poorly documented, not only historically but also archaeologically. And also there's two other things briefly, and then I'll shut up. The Chinese appeared in Emeryville from time to time, even very early in the 1860s. They were here as agricultural workers, and also. In the late 1860s, Weird constructed the Oakland Trotting Park, and that oval straddled Temescal Creek, and it's been very described as bridged over. But the 1876 map has it as if the whole racetrack was covered over. And the interior of the oval had no evidence of the creek. So how was that supported? That would be very interesting. Also, thank you.
Thank you. Again, if you would keep your comments succinct but thorough. Yes?
Could we take a democratic vote on reinstating the 3-minute rule? Yeah. I mean, archaeology is my favorite subject, but I know we're going to be here till 1 a.m.
How about a yellow at 3?
Sounds like a...
How about a yellow at 3 and a...
Yeah. Let's proceed and ask everybody to be respectful of each other's time. Hope I can pronounce this. Therese Lahaye? Lahaye. I should know you. You're doing the art at the Park on Powell project, aren't you?
It's installed next month.
All right, good.
I'm Therese Lahaye from the 45th Street Artists Co-op. I'm here representing the Electrical Committee, and we have been researching photovoltaic panels on the building directly on Horton Street across from the site. And we are getting ready to make a large capital outlay of solar panels on the building. And we are very concerned about the 7-story building across the street blocking the western sunlight and thwarting our investment. So we're glad to see that the light and shadow study is on your list of considerations. Thank you.
M. Louise Stanley.
I'm the canary in the mine. I've lived on the corner of 45th and Horton for 26 years, and I've lived through toxic cleanups, a loading dock that gushed diesel into my studio's windows, whether they're closed or not. That went on for years. And now I get diesel in my studio whether my windows are closed or not. just normal traffic. My concern is a stop sign or stop light, which would mean that trucks and cars would idle longer than just, I like it when they just kind of ease through the stop sign and don't stop, because then they don't change gears and poof out the stuff that I breathe. So my big problem is the air quality, and it's a narrow corridor, and there's the Sherwin Williams building is tall, so the fumes just sort of hover in that area. As far as the light, I get beautiful afternoon sunlight, but that's just me. But most of the people on Horton Street, along where my studio is located, are getting diesel in their windows. And that I don't know what you can do about. But I didn't speak last week because I was in emergency because of I've got sarcoidosis, and it's mainly because I've been breathing crap for so long. I'm not going to sue anybody, but I just can't handle any more stuff. So.
Okay, Sharon Wilshire.
Okay. Sharon Wilshire, 1420 45th Street, and Community Liaison for the 45th Street Artists Cooperative. The Artists Cooperative is 56 studios with 80 individuals, including many families, several with young children. Our group has been in Emeryville for over 40 years at 45th Street, bounded by Horton and Holden Streets, and is a national model for affordable artist-owned housing. And I don't speak Sequa, and now I know from Mr. Ambrose's comments that, I don't think 40 years is historic, but I don't know, does that make us a cultural resource? We are a live-work community, and for most of our members, that means 24/7, directly across the street from the Sherwin-Williams property and the proposed project. With that in mind, we are eyes on the street, real time, for traffic volume and speed on Horton Street, 45th Street, Park Avenue, 40th Street, 45th and Hollis, Stanford and Hollis, and Park and Hollis. This has been our neighborhood, walking, running, biking, and driving for decades. The intersection at 40th and Horton already presents significant traffic problems for our neighborhood and for passage along Shellmound and 40th. Any traffic analysis for this proposal has to take into serious consideration both existing traffic as well as any projected traffic from this development and other existing or proposed development approvals for the area. As a 24/7 community in older industrial buildings, we have additional concerns with regard to increases in traffic and any changes in air quality anticipated both for the day-to-day life of the project, the proposed project, as well as traffic, air quality, and noise generated during the construction phase. As longtime residents, we were actively involved for 20 years in the remediation of this contaminated Sherwin-Williams site, which turned the property into what looked like a quarry site with excavations as deep as 35 feet for the removal of lead arsenate, volatile solvents, and other toxics. So understandably, we have concerns for proper protocol in place during construction, excavation, and soil work to provide safeguards to monitor and prevent the generation of health hazards during this construction.
Oops. Thank you, Sharon. Nora Pavwells. Over here, Miro.
Thank you. I'm Nora Pavwells, also living at the Artist Co-op. I live across the street. I live straight across the street from the old Sherwin-Williams building. And my major concern is the construction. The condition of the windows on Horton Street is very bad, as you have heard also from Lulu and Sharon. And they let in all the dust and the noise even when they're closed. So I'm very concerned that a 5-year construction with the existing windows will ruin the productive lives of the artists that live and work here. It will certainly severely affect the business of my husband, who has a bookbinding business on Horton Street, John the Merritt here. So dust is a major issue, and so something should be done to minimize the effect of the construction.
All right. Thank you. Gary Grimm.
Yeah, I'm Gary Grimm, and I'm speaking on behalf of my wife, Ann Holsbury, and myself. Ann has had her studio at the 45th Street Artists Co-op for approximately 30 years. And Mr. Bryan, I'm going to start my comments with a question to you that will help me so I know what comments to make, and that is whether the city has made a determination as to whether the project application is complete under the city ordinance and the Permit Streamlining Act.
Yeah, Miru can address that.
The project has not been deemed complete at this point.
Okay, that's helpful. The first thing I want to comment on is I think we need additional time to submit written comments. The applicant's design graphics are dated January 20th, the same date as the City Council study session. That's just 7 days ago. Lots of new material. The project has not been deemed complete. It's just too short a period of time. And I think the city staff in the past has characterized the CEQA schedule as being very aggressive. And we would like to have the CEQA process being very carefully thought out and with the important details to the environmental impacts. Therefore, I would like to request, at least for my comments, an additional time period to submit written comments so that they can be made more complete. So that's one request that I have.
I agree with that.
But I do have a few comments that I'd like to make, just my initial comments for the purposes of the scoping session. First, on cumulative impacts. I think project impacts taken together with other projects in the area that would compound or increase the impacts must be considered, including those projects where entitlements have been approved but not yet built, projects currently in the construction process, projects recently completed, and reasonably foreseeable probable future projects. And I think examples of those kinds of projects are the Novartis approved project, the project that's currently under construction at Hollis and Powell, the warehouse building described in the Emeryville warehouse loft comments, and some other projects in the area. Now moving to our studio in the co-op, our studio is an interior studio with skylights, very high, large windows in a sawtooth pattern building, like many other of the art studios in the co-op. Some of the other art studios have windows facing the street. Most of the live-work studios are used during the daytime, has been emphasized today, during the projected construction hours. Our windows are usually open in the warmer months to increase light, which is very important to artists, and to increase ventilation. Thus, we're very concerned about the impacts of the project with regard to noise from the extended and very lengthy construction period, dust from the construction, which includes particulate matter and potential VOC and petroleum hydrocarbon vapors, light and sunlight blockage from the height of the buildings. And careful consideration should be given to avoidance or mitigation to address each of those concerns, and to include a detailed sunlight and shadow study has been already discussed. So thanks for listening to the comments. And again, I request additional time for written comments. And we strongly support your support the analysis of the alternative approaches that you'll hear this evening from other co-op speakers. So thank you.
Tim Curran.
Thank you. Tim Curran, 4250 Horton Street. I live right across the street from Building 31. I'd also like to say that the time frame for the EIR is very fast since the final plans that were presented 10 days ago, I've found it difficult to come up with the alternative that I feel necessary to present. So I want to second that about the time frame. I'm most interested in the traffic impacts, specifically because of the density that's involved. And I'm also considering and confused about how those impacts will be judged in consideration of the city's interest in adding traffic calming measures to the neighborhood, which haven't been established. So we've got a lot of variables about traffic circulation. And I have an alternative, but since the overhead projector's broken, I'll present that later with a different configuration of internal roads for the project. I'll leave my comments to be written. And I hope that we can have more time to prepare those comments. That's all I have to say.
Mike McConnell.
Perfect. I think of these. I came in tonight thinking that we really don't have a direct conflict between a number of interests. We actually have what I would call more of a Venn diagram. There are some things that I think everyone in this room can agree on, and there's some things that we don't all agree on. And I hope this process will help us find ways to find the mutual areas of concern greater and greater. For example, we all would prefer not to live next to a dusty parking lot, not even parking lot, just even the geese have even gone since it stopped raining. But and I'm from 1500 Park. We've already submitted an extensive letter, and I'm not going to go over that again. But I did want to say that I'm very pleased that we have, as neighbors, artists who are able to and capable of proposing an alternative, which I did not realize until the city council meeting was a desired approach for the EIR CEQA process. And so what we have been doing is spending time working with them, and we're very enthusiastic about the approach that they are taking. And specifically, I want to call out a couple of things about that approach. One is that if you look at the lot, it's a very large lot. In the northern side of it, you have really industrial. You have a Chiron Novartis. You have an industrial, beautiful industrial campus, but it's office buildings and labs. And the south side, you have narrow streets, areas that are rapidly becoming mostly residential, and already very overburdened with traffic. And I'm sure your study will show that. So that the approach of shifting the volume, the density north, away from the narrow streets to the south, up toward that area west of the Novartis parking lot, we're enthusiastic about. The idea of reducing the scale on the southern part of the project, we're enthusiastic about. The idea of opening up more green space in the southern part of the project, we're enthusiastic about. The idea of having more entrances, which was, the more entrances, the more you can diffuse the traffic. So the Halleck Street, which the developers have already agreed to at our suggestion, which we're very pleased and happy that they've done that. Those ideas are all ideas that are really worth doing. Frankly, I know I'm speaking only for me personally. I know that this needs to be a money-making project, and I think there are ways to do that. And I think that you can have, certainly if our loft building is any indication, there's a lot of money to be made in high-quality real estate in Emeryville. I know that's not the purpose of this meeting, but I just wanted to say how pleased we are that alternative approaches are being approached, and I really hope this project can be built in a way that enhances the neighborhood.
Joe Light.
orders, we're going to switch orders.
Richard Grossetti. I guess that's with my forbearance, too.
Yes.
Richard Grossetti, environmental consultant to the 45th Street Artists Cooperative. Just a few comments. We're going to be submitting a detailed comment letter, but a couple things that are important, I think, to bring up tonight. One is, on behalf of the cooperative, I am requesting an extension of the NOP comment period. And as you've already heard, the currently designed project wasn't even available for the public to look at in large-scale plans until a few days before the study session that the council had on the 20th. There's also, the project just keeps changing, and there's no evidence that the project as currently proposed is even feasible. Right now we've got a project that calls roadway open space. We've got a project that creates subdividable parcels that may not meet independent parcel requirements. We've got a whole host of non-compliances with the Park Avenue plan and with the general plan and with zoning inconsistencies, at least that we have identified based on the current plans, which are at such a small scale and without enough information to really figure out whether the project is even an approvable project. And I don't know, I don't want to put words into staff's mouth, but obviously staff has commented that the application is not even complete. You shouldn't, my 32 years writing CEQA documents and teaching CEQA, I would strongly counsel people against starting the CEQA process without a complete application. The city staff hasn't been provided with these plans. We don't know if it's approvable. And that's not the purpose of CEQA, to figure out whether a project is actually approvable. The purpose of CEQA is to look at environmental impacts of an approvable project and to decide how you want to tweak that project or what alternatives to that project. But here we were kind of one step back on that flow chart you had of, is this really a project that can even be considered in the impact assessment? And I made some of these comments previously. So we need to make sure that this project is approvable and then have an NOP based on whatever project is approvable. And then for the community, for the decision makers, everybody needs to know so that we have a firm, fixed basis to do the CEQA process as required by law. So at a minimum, we'd like to request a 30-day extension of the NOP period. Another comment that I'll have on the NOP itself. I'm reading from CEQA Guidelines Section 15082A1, which says what needs to be in a notice of preparation. And it says the notice of preparation shall provide responsible and trustee agencies and the Office of Planning and Research with sufficient information describing the project. Okay, so you got to have a firm, fixed project, and the potential environmental effects. And this information needs to be sufficient to enable responsible agencies to make a meaningful response. What we have in the NOP, what we have in the NOP here is a list of topics, and what we had on the screen was a list of topics. We have transportation, housing, land use, air quality, climate change, noise, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. 1 or 2 words per topic. The problem is that list could apply to almost any large-scale project, and what we're trying to figure out is what the EIR is going to evaluate with respect to this project. And so what would have been nice to see, or what I think should have been in the NOP, is some more scope of work. What is the scope of work, so that we can respond to the scope of work and say, yeah, that we like this, and no, we'd like you to do some more work on this or this or this. Right now, we're responding in absence of a scope of work to us. We don't know, for example, if the EIR proposes to rely in a large part on the general plan EIR. We don't know what's going to be done for traffic. We don't know how much noise analysis is going to be done. We don't know the level of analysis that's going to go into the cultural resources analysis or the air quality analysis or the health risk analysis. We just don't know. And so that leaves us with a lot more work. And that's another reason that we're asking for an extension, is because we now are kind of in a position where we have to flesh out a scope of work to give to you to assure that our concerns are met. One other item that typically is at least generally mentioned in an NOP is alternatives. And we don't know what alternatives are being considered by the city for consideration in this EIR. We know that you're required to have a no project alternative, and we know that you're required to have a range of reasonable alternatives that reduce project impacts, but we don't know what alternatives are being considered. So, and beyond that, we don't know what the project objectives are that the alternatives are supposed to meet. So we're going to, the Artist Cooperative is going to present some alternatives this evening. What we don't want to happen is that those alternatives get shot down because they don't meet some objectives that we don't even know what they are yet. Regarding alternatives, the community will present realistic alternatives that they've developed for the site. And that's as opposed to the applicant's basically site stuffing exercise. I don't think the applicant, I mean, I don't know what the applicant really wants to build, but it's probably something smaller than this. They've just sort of seen how much they can shove into the site. We're going to look at realistic alternatives. There's no book, these aren't really bookends, but they're good starting points for good design on the site. And we're requesting the EIR to consider these, and if through your analysis you find that these alternatives need tweaking or revisions to make them more responsive to impacts that you identify, then go ahead and do that. We don't want these to be thrown out because they don't adequately respond to some impact that you identify in the future. We want you to use these, to view these as sort of living organisms that can be revised to further reduce project impacts. Also, I want to caution against rejection of alternatives that are being presented by the community based on some sort of concept of infeasibility or not fully implementing some objectives that we don't know what they are yet. And I would ask you to take a look at it's an old court case, Sierra Club versus Contra Costa County, that says very clearly that you can't reject alternatives absent, on financial grounds, absent independently reviewed detailed financial information showing that they're not feasible. So I'm basically saying don't take the applicant's word for it. You're going to have to actually provide evidence. So on behalf of the community, we look forward to working with staff and applicant to refine these alternatives. One other minor little thing. In the presentation, it was noted that CEQA only looks at direct physical changes to the environment. That's not actually quite correct. CEQA does look at direct physical changes, but it also looks at indirect physical changes, and therefore sometimes socioeconomic issues do get looked at if they result in indirect physical changes to the environment. Okay, thank you.
Okay. I'm going to keep my comments fairly brief since most of these issues have been covered by previous speakers and some following ones, and we'll also be more details in the letter that will eventually be brought to you. I just have a couple of policy issues I wanted to bring up. Joe Light. First, the general plan in terms of traffic and circulation mandates that traffic and circulation should be looked at from a quality of service perspective. And the general plan itself calls for the development of a city quality of service standard. And that was placed in the general plan 5-year work schedule for completion and adoption. That 5-year work schedule ending in 2014. So we would assume that that standard is in place. But up to this point, we have not been provided or been able to be provided with an example of that quality of service standard. So therefore, in absence, absence of such a metric by which to evaluate the traffic and circulation standards of the cities, of the project within the city, it would seem to speak to further deeming the incompleteness and unreadiness of this project to move forward, and a proper way of evaluating what its impacts will be. Now, the general plan EIR, to our understanding, traffic analysis was based on level of service, and not a quality of service metric, and the general plan itself now deems such an approach to be inappropriate. So general plan EIR could not be used as a basis or tiering from when it comes to the traffic circulation issues. Now, that incompleteness, just to emphasize again, the staff itself has deemed the project incomplete. They sent in December a letter of incompleteness to the applicant requesting certain materials to move forward. The revised plan that you have does not even contain all of the requested materials that staff had asked for in December. So again, I'm just reiterating what has been brought to your attention earlier, that we don't have a complete, feasible, defined project just yet that's really ready to move forward. In moving forward on policies, a couple of quick notes. We'd ask you to look at the Park Avenue district plan standards in relationship not only to the project but to the alternatives as far as conformance with its goals and policies, particularly in terms of its street system and fine-grained pattern of development language of that district plan. Finally, on terms of circulation analysis, we think it's important not simply to look at wholesale impacts of volume and around the street, the external impacts of the circulation, but to look at the actual design metrics of the internal street layout in terms of queuing, directionality, crossing conflicts, intermodal conflicts, interface with the with exiting and facing properties, so that you're looking at a functionality in relationship to the project design and its alternatives, not simply raw traffic metrics. With that's really all I have for now. There'll be more following, of course, in our letters.
Paul Germain.
Charlie, can you have someone speak ahead of me? I have some graphics to put up.
Margaret Fisher.
Hi, I'm Margaret Fisher from the Artists Co-op, and I have I have some perspective to add. I'm glad that you are including sound and noise as part of the physical component of your study, because it's not necessarily known how the front wall, the facing wall of the existing Sherwin-Williams building acts as a sounding board and reflects sound to various areas. So I wanted to ask you if you can put that slide up again that shows the two, Plan A and Plan B, and I'll show you the pattern of reflection. So many of you have probably heard of theaters, for example, or rooms where the acoustics are so good that you can stand in one end and whisper and somebody in the other end can hear you. And examples are Federal Hall in New York on Wall Street. Another example here is the theater in the Palace of the Legion of Honor. You can whisper at one part of the theater and somebody at the opposite end can hear you. So, Paul, I think your drawing is right in front of where I'm going to...
No, it's not. It's not covering anything.
Oh, it's taking the projection. Great. Okay, so I was one of the more vocal people when Sherwin-Williams did their cleanup, and it was very helpful. So I'm jumping ahead, and then I'm going to come back to this plan. I was one of the people quite affected by the noise and the dirt, and my windows opened onto Horton Street. It was very effective to learn through their community liaison what the future plans were beyond that particular cleanup, which indicated there might be more environmental cleanup in the future, depending on the economics of the system they had in place. Given that, a set of double pane windows and a closed air conditioning system was installed in my studio after the Sherwin-Williams cleanup. The perfect example today, we had jackhammering on the sidewalk right outside my studio. It was perfectly acceptable. It was minimal intrusion into my studio. So the windows and the closed air system are effective mitigation for the kinds of cleanup that happen. And now I'll show you the sound pattern. There's a little inset, a carport right here on the Artist Co-op, and my door would look like it's an interior door, but it opens to the outside with a little bit of building between the egress and the street. The sound goes from this entire wall of Sherwin-Williams, and it continues across this proposed street, and it hits a small wall at the entrance to our driveway that is not indicated on this drawing. And that sound comes right inside the carport. So the example I'll give is a jazz saxophonist used to rehearse right here outside Lulu's window. And I heard it in stereo. I heard it from my windows right onto the street. And then the sound bounced off this board into the interior space of the co-op. So that's to say that I encourage the study to include acoustical patterns off the walls that might not otherwise be considered. I know that you'd probably measure noise levels. And that's the, so for noise and dirt, double pane windows that are bulletproof and closed air conditioning system is effective. And you're all welcome to come by while they're jackhammering and see what you think. Thank you.
Okay, Paul Germain.
Thank you.
We're just worried about it not thing over. So which one do you want first?
I'll put this one right underneath this one because
I don't want to crease the screen.
Okay. You're going to hold? Okay. Oh, wow. Two assistants. Two assistants. I would like to request as well. Just momentarily.
We'll hold it, and then that way they can take notes. Right. Yeah.
You could walk it around. Oh, there we go. I would like to also reiterate. Reiterate the extension of the comment period for 30 days. The newest iteration of the project was presented on the 27th, and if the comment period closes on the 30th, that only gives us 3 days to make our written comments. So an extension of the comment period does seem reasonable. This iteration that we would like to be considered as an alternative to the project and would reduce the project impacts. There's a lot of detail in this project, so I'm just going to emphasize what somebody has already spoken about. And one of them is that we have moved the density and height of the project to the north end in this iteration, and we have lowered the building heights in this area to something comparable to the buildings in the area and something comparable to the existing commercial building. In addition, we've moved the parking from here to over here so that we thought that car parking and trains was pretty compatible. So instead of putting it directly across from the Artist Co-op, we put it adjacent to the trains. The big thing is an extension through the existing building of 45th Street, which is an extension of the existing road. And we have placed arcades, colonnades along that road on the ground floor of the existing commercial building. The detail you probably can't see, but again, we just wanted to reiterate, wanted to show that the extension of 45th Street was a better alternative than putting 46th Street so that it ended at our driveway. The construction impacts, as already noted, people in the community are concerned that the construction parking be on the site and not in the neighborhood. They're worried about, their concerns are the travel of the construction vehicles, the unloading and the offloading of those construction vehicles. And you've already heard about the noise levels and the construction schedule. 5 years is what's projected. 5 years is what's projected. How am I doing? Better? 5 years is what's projected. And to put a live-work community, and when you say live-work, that means they live and they work there. That's what live-work means, that they're all day during the construction process. And that impact is very, very large for people in the visual arts, people that have classes and people that, in order to get fresh air, have to open their windows. Thank you.
Brian Donahue.
You can use that.
What do you want me to use? Okay. Okay, I want to speak just for a moment about density, and I want, we as a people here in Emeryville, according to our general plan, and our general plan was, by the way, we received awards for being so democratically vetted. We decided that some amount of density is good. And in the case of this project, some amount is good for for this neighborhood, and a different amount is good for the whole city. But we are concerned, I'm concerned, and I want the EIR writers to not assume that the developer has the information about how much development is good for the neighborhood and for the whole city. So the developer has a vision of increasing the density to X amount, and I don't think that should be taken for granted that that's the amount that we democratically want. And if our wishes are not met, then that's a negative impact because makes us feel bad. And then, of course, there's all the problems of the density that we don't like. So I want you to not assume that, there's a huge assumption here that the amount of density that is going to happen is the amount that the developers are proposing, and that's an inherent good, and we say no, we want to be able to decide. And so we hope that when you write the EIR, you bear that in mind. The retail component of this project. Well, the city is calling the project, and the developers are calling the project a mixed-use project, and it's zoned for mixed use, but it's skewed extremely heavily towards residential, and so I don't think it really can fairly be called mixed use, and so I want that quantified by the EIR. The people here have told the developer and the city very clearly that we want non-formula retail, locally owned, locally serving retail. The developer has indicated that the developers are interested in that as well, but that's not good enough. We need guarantees. So we shouldn't take the developer's word for it that that's what we're going to get. And so insofar as the EIR can comment on that I want to have you comment on the idea that guarantees need to be made. In other words, it needs to be in writing that we're going to get what they say that we're going to get. Otherwise, we're negatively impacted. Okay, somebody else touched on this. I'll just say briefly. This project is inconsistent with city documents. The housing element, the general plan. And so insofar that that's the city documents are what we democratically have decided we want for our city, we will be negatively impacted if the internal documents, the city documents, are not assuaged. And so we want this. I'm saying we will be negatively impacted unless the internal documents are followed. The developer is talking about family-friendly housing for this project and about how he's going to deliver, I believe, 4 or 5%, and he's defining family-friendly housing as 3 bedrooms. But of course, the city documents, if you read through them, you'll see that that's not what family-friendly housing is. So that needs to be quantified. And we've decided we want family-friendly housing in the city, and so insofar that we don't get it, we're being negatively impacted. So I want the EIR to talk about that, the family-friendly housing. And then there's one other thing here. I want to go extra legal with regard to affordable family-friendly housing, because as it is right now in Emeryville, the city has decided that family-friendly housing need not be affordable, and but I'm maintaining that it does need to be affordable. That's part and parcel of being family-friendly, because the function of why we want families here is, I think there's 2 reasons. One is because we like that demographic group, we want more diversity, but more importantly than that, we want to support our schools. So if family housing is not affordable, it'll be rich and upper middle class people moving in with children, and then they won't put their children in our public schools, and that's not, then the main objective of family-friendly housing is not being met. So I want the general plan to discuss that. Okay. Next, I want to talk quickly about contextualization. I've read a lot of general plans over the years, and I've noticed that general plan writers defer to experts commonly, traffic engineers, city planners. I mean, experts are deferred to in the writing of general plans, and yet when it comes to visual aesthetics of a project, suddenly people that have no degree in design or aesthetics are suddenly now experts. For instance, city planners are now, those are people that don't understand for instance, the Western aesthetic canon. And so I think that should be deferred to. We want the Western aesthetic canon deferred to with regard to design for this project. So for instance, contextualization. That word is bandied about a lot, and the way it ends up getting realized commonly by EIR writers and then as built is that if there's bricks in a neighborhood, in an existing neighborhood, the new project is going to have bricks. So that's considered contextualized. But if you are familiar with the Western aesthetic canon, you will recognize that's an extremely simplistic way to look at it. As a matter of fact, actually subverts the idea of contextualization because, for instance, you could have complement. So where there's existing brick, which is rough texture and reddish, the complement would be the opposite side of the color wheel, for instance, which would be from kind of a reddish orange, would be like kind of a blue-green, and then maybe smooth. So that would be a complement to a existing brick structure, which is a more nuanced and more correct way to view contextualization rather than brick equals brick and glass equals glass. And I just want a smarter way of this project being looked at by the EIR writers, and I want you to employ some people that are familiar with the Western aesthetic canon rather than just city planners and people that just don't really know and just throwing out ideas. Lastly, the psychology of the space. So these buildings and this development is going to it's going to present. It's going to present a feeling. They will have feeling. The buildings will present a feeling. A psychology of space will be presented, and that can range anywhere from being alienating and bad to uplifting and good. And EIRs are just infamously bad at analyzing something as arcane as psychology of space. But yet, it is a negative impact when a building or a project feels bad, and it's hard for the average person to quantify, perhaps. But that's your job. That's what you need to figure out how to do. It makes people feel bad, for instance, or feel good. And I want some alacrity here. I want you to rise to the challenge, and I want the psychology of the space that's going to be presented to be analyzed and for its possible negative impacts. And that's all I wanted to say. Thank you.
Thank you. Kate Rudder.
Hi, I'm Kate Rudder from 4230 Blue Star Corner. I just wanted to make a comment that the folks I've talked with at our residence, which is very small, we only have 20 units, are very much in support of our neighbors at 1500 Park and the Artist Co-op in the detailed letter of comments and potentially some of the alternative proposals. I did want to kind of voice in, as we don't often have a voice necessarily in this venue, so I just wanted to be on record as we care, and we're here, we're small, but we can be vocal. And also just to draft off of an offhand comment at the earlier session last week, which says, nobody cares about traffic on Halleck, which I'm sure was just an offhand comment. Turns out there's a lot of people, or a small but mighty number of people, that do care a lot about traffic on Halleck, and especially around the construction and routing during the construction of this project. So I just encourage the EIR really to, in reinforcement of all y'all here, to really look at the study of construction, noise, dust, et cetera. We got a taste of that during the remediation of the site. All of those trucks that required surface transit of the remediated soil went right by our homes, and many of us do work at home, so that was just a taste of what would be a much longer process. As far as the resulting development and kind of the traffic and issues with that, again, we are right in the thick of that, so any of the traffic rerouting and some of the site plan will have a significant permanent impact on us, and so we'd like to be have that really well covered in the EIR. There's also existing trucking usage currently. I don't believe that's part of the long-term plan for that site, but the refrigeration company does currently have some trucking, and there's a warehouse across the street that currently has trucking too. So as far as permanent kind of behavior, as far as traffic flows, that might need to be addressed or studied or changed. And then lastly, just encourage the city to potentially appoint another community liaison during this really intense time of both planning and public process, and really make sure that all the community members not only have an opportunity to come here on limited Tuesday evenings, but to foster conversation within their communities, in their buildings, on their terms, and kind of have someone from the city or someone representing kind of the city's latest information as part of those, even if it needs to happen electronically. We just really need a good community outreach system for this project. Thanks.
Canon Tolan. Janan? Oh. Janan? C-A-N-A-N?
My name is Janan Tolan. I live on 1420 45th Street in the Artist Co-op. I'm sure that everyone knows what live-work spaces are. There are spaces in which people live and in which the same people also work. The co-op is such a space. We have vegetable gardens and fruit trees in the backyard, and a green space where children can play. We are there always. There's not a day where the space is empty, so no breaks on weekends, and there are no holidays, 24/7 every week. Teaching, workshop, productions, and creations of all sorts of things are happening. Day and night. We often open our windows, doors and skylight for fresh air to breathe, and for daylight to better see our work. I was there during the cleaning of the Sherwin-Williams site years back, on the site where the massive development is now considered to be built. Those were not very happy days, but we believe that this dreaded site cleaning was done for a good cause. It was for the improvement of our neighborhood. The future project to be built there was to make this improvement happen. Now that we have seen the proposed project, we are perplexed. It seems that something got lost in the course of the design process. South Park, after which the project was modeled, is gone. The density is multiplied. The environmental impact, that is traffic, noise, dust, and pollution, overlooked or not yet studied. Consideration for a truly mixed-use community are minimal, and affordability, I think, seem to be forgotten. For the proposed project to happen, we residents living in proximity to this site will be condemned to 5 years of incredible hardship, 5 torturous years of construction. That is 5 years of drilling, construction noises, constant beeping of reversing vehicles, material loading and unloading, idling trucks emitting noxious gases, and creating congestion on the streets. 5 years of exposure of these, plus dust of airborne not so clean particles and exposure to harmful vapors. We need to give it more time to think it over, so that we are, and the residents of neighboring communities are not trampled and poisoned and driven mad during these long 5 years. For example, was the use of trains and railway considered for the hauling of debris and for the delivery of the construction materials, like the way it was done during the decontamination and site cleaning? Will there be a careful monitoring of the harmful vapors emitted during excavation for the foundation of such tall buildings? If yes, what kind are considered? We do not have the capacity nor the necessary structures and finishes in our buildings to withstand these assaults. We cannot emphasize enough how concerned we are about the traffic and the health risk we are facing during the construction of such projects and its aftermath. We need time to make the right decision and carefully consider all these important issues. Thank you.
Colin Shane.
Hi, I'm Colin Shane. I run a film production company and underground community center on Horton Street. I want to say that I'm honored to be in the company of such intelligent, positive, and democratic humans here in the community. I would like to see an extension of the comments and would like to know what us as residents and business owners need to do to have that granted to us. This comment is for if this project is approved in any way. I'd love to see the review have a priority enforcing this mega development to take responsibility in implementing the means to utilize reusable energy and integrated water management and become above the standard and not simply good enough. Thank you.
Okay, that's the last speaker card I have. I have a couple of comment cards. If anybody wants to submit one, there's blank ones over here. You may go ahead and do that. Now, we are going to go ahead and hear from anyone who has not had a chance to speak yet who did not submit a comment card. So we'll go this way.
My name is Kristen Peterson, and I'm with the Artists Co-op. And I'm going to submit most of my concerns, the traffic and dirt and noise concerns and density concerns I have via writing. But I really want to reiterate the importance of granting an extension. I know there were a number of people that wanted to submit alternatives, and due to circumstances out of everybody's control with the lack of the digital ability to do so, anyone who didn't have an homage to analog was kind of left out and was unable to share their ideas at the public hearing. So I think it'd be nice if we could extend the comment period so that people can find a venue to share their ideas, their alternative ideas. Thank you.
Anybody else?
I'm Kim Harrington, 45th Street Artists Cooperative. I can't stress enough the importance of extending this review and giving the community a chance to bring forth a number of alternatives for this project. The drawings you see over here were done in about 2 days, and we had to rush it. And we have more ideas. And keep in mind that once the developers have left, we will be here living with the result.
Anybody else? Going once, going twice? All right, well, I want to thank everybody for coming tonight. We heard you loud and clear about extending the comment period. We can't unilaterally do that tonight. We'll take that request under advisement and let you know. The comment period currently ends this Friday at 5 p.m. I will note that it was originally a 30-day comment period ending in the middle of January, and it was extended once at the direction of the City Council to the end of January. So it's now a 45-day comment period, which is longer than a normal NOP comment period. Is there a question about that?
Could you
give
tell
them
us
the
when
microphone?
you might expect a decision, because it's very critical in the next few days?
I will discuss it internally, and I can't give you an exact time, but we'll try to make a determination this week. That's right. Before the end of the comment period.
If it's already been extended, wouldn't it have ended then before the public hearing?
Give her the microphone.
I'm confused.
It was previously extended back in December. The notice of preparation was initially published in December, in the middle of December, for a 30-day comment period ending, I think it was January 15th. Is that right? And we extended it sometime in December. If you have a copy of the notice of preparation, you'll see that it says on it revised. The reason it says revised is that the comment period was extended to the end of January. That was done in December.
Okay, but then the new plans that came out were from January 20th, and I just wanted to make another note of
We understand. We heard that.
Mr. Bryant, who does have the authority to grant the extension?
That's a decision that needs to be made collectively by city staff.
Just to stress, it is critical that we get that decision as soon as possible.
We hear you.
Yeah.
If there's no other comments, I want to thank you all for coming tonight and look forward to your further participation. I do want to emphasize also, though, that your input into the EIR and its alternatives is, of course, very important. There will, in addition, be other opportunities to comment on both the EIR and the project itself. At a bare minimum, there will be a comment period on the draft EIR, which typically is 45 days. There will be a public hearing before the Planning Commission on the draft EIR, and then there will be public hearings on the project before both the Planning Commission and the City Council. We don't have exact dates for any of those things right now, but there are all of those additional opportunities for public comment. So thank you for coming, and thank you for your participation.